most of her flagship economic policies. We'll be bringing you the latest political and economic developments.
Yes, and a protester outside the Chinese consulate in Manchester appeared to be dragged and beaten by officials. How concerned should we be by this incident? And are we treating the Chinese state as a threat to British interests?
And activists from Just Stop Oil closed the Dartford crossing on the M25 for a second day in a row. Are the police and the government taking the disruption caused across this country seriously enough? Let us know what you think.
Yes, we have all that coming up and much more across the programme, so make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Well, Liz Truss has vowed to continue on as Prime Minister following a turbulent day in the House of Commons. The Prime Minister has reiterated that she is still committed to boosting economic growth, but accepted her initial plan was not sustainable. This is a snippet of what she had to say.
What I'm focused on is delivering for the British public. Now, I recognise we have made mistakes. I'm sorry for those mistakes, but I've fixed the mistakes. I've appointed a new Chancellor. We have restored economic stability and fiscal discipline. And what I now want to do is go on and deliver for the public. We were elected on the 2019 manifesto. I'm determined to deliver on that. Levelling up, securing investment into all parts of our country, getting roads built, getting opportunities right across the nation. And that's what I'm thinking about and that's what I'm focused on.
Well, that was the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Well, our political reporter, Catherine Forster, is in Downing Street for us. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Has the mood in Number 10 changed?
No, it really hasn't. The Prime Minister looks more precarious than ever, really, this morning, despite having got rid of her former Chancellor on which she'd built Trussonomics, despite her mini-budget being in the bin, Trussonomics effectively over, certainly in terms of tax cuts in the short term. She looks very precarious. Even some of her biggest supporters, the Sun, the Daily Mail, today seem to be turning against her. They were massive supporters of her, huge cheerleaders. Even they seem to be losing faith. Now, she's meeting her cabinet as we speak, and we're told that they are learning that no department whatsoever, including health, including defence, will be exempt, will be ring-fenced from potential spending cuts. Now, talk of tax cuts is gone. It's all about tax rises and cuts to public spending. Liz Truss, of course, only in the last week and during her leadership campaign had said that public spending would continue to rise. That has all changed. And some bad polls out, and a poll out yesterday by Redfield and Wilson gave Labour a 36% lead. That is the biggest lead by any party since October 1997. YouGov this morning, Liz Truss's favourability has now fallen to an all-time low of -70. That's even lower than Boris Johnson's -40 when he left office. And even Conservative members seem to have turned against her. A poll of 500 of them by JL Partners has found that if they had the vote again, 60% of them would in fact choose Rishi Sunak. But it does seem clear that Conservative members will not be allowed to choose her replacement if indeed it does come to that, as seems likely. I was talking to a very influential Conservative MP in PCH earlier. He was saying absolutely the members wouldn't get a say, but also that MPs running around like headless chickens was deeply unhelpful. He thought she would have till the fiscal plan at the end of October at least, and obviously they need to coalesce around how to get rid of her and who to replace her with.
Catherine, you've not just been talking to members of Parliament in Portcullis House, but you've been standing there on Downing Street as well, no doubt seeing the Cabinet going in this morning. Just very briefly, what on earth is the mood like on the faces of the people running this country?
Most of them were really honestly trying to pretend that the media were not here. Understandably, they are not keen to engage. Jacob Rees-Mogg was, I think, pretty much the only one that was willing to sort of say, yes, we have confidence, yes, we'll be fine. Everybody else pretty much ignoring us. And clearly, Jeremy Hunt, to many people, appears to be in charge, and Liz Truss looks very, very weak. So, to be a fly on the wall of the room where Cabinet is taking place now.
Well, Catherine, thank you so much for that. We'll no doubt pop up back to you a little bit later on and see if we can get any reaction off the back of Cabinet. But for now, thank you live from Downing Street.
Thank you. Well, has Liz Truss done enough to survive, or is Truss's departure from Downing Street now a question of when, not if? Here to chew through all of these big questions is Edwina Currie, former Conservative Minister. Thank you so much and good morning. Can she survive?
Oh, no, of course she can't survive. My goodness, I'm going to put this on record. I think she is charmless, graceless, brainless, and useless. And what do I mean by that? Charmless, she doesn't have any of the skills that, for example, Margaret Thatcher had to put across her argument, to be persuasive, to charm people into supporting what she's trying to do. Graceless, even her last statement with all the I. You never got Margaret Thatcher doing that. And being,
Edwina.
Hang on a minute. I'm going to say this in you sack a senior civil servant, you ignore all the systems that are there, and then you wonder why the markets really get freaked out. Brainless, because however valuable and useful the tax cutting agenda is going to be, and it will be at some future point, it took Margaret 9 years to get there. And you can't do it now. And she should have realised that. And as a result, she's useless. I tell you what my solution is. My solution is that we should just continue at some future point, perhaps after Christmas, with Jeremy Hunt as the Chancellor, because he really has calmed everything down. And there's absolutely no reason why, for the time being, since being Chancellor is the most important job this year, why he shouldn't just continue as Prime Minister. Gladstone did both jobs, and it would save us all the hassle of having to go through another leadership contest.
Gladstone did do both jobs, as did Pitt the Younger for 20 years. Although back then in the 1790s, Chancellor was a much more junior position, and indeed the position of Prime Minister was called, as it still is technically called today, First Lord of the Treasury. Technically, the Prime Minister is the person in charge of the purse strings. But, I mean, how realistic is it? Jeremy Hunt was the person who came last in the last leadership contest. Rishi Sunak, who's also mooted, was profoundly rejected by the Conservative membership. When it comes to finding a unity candidate, isn't the problem here the same problem that kept Boris Johnson potentially in his job for a lot longer than people expected, which is there is simply no one who can unite the Conservative Party? No candidate was able to get more than just about a third of Conservative MPs backing them over the summer. And there's no one who really inspires the membership of the Conservative Party or indeed the parliamentarians of the Conservative Party.
Oh, I love you, Tom. You know your history. At least you know your 18th and 19th centuries. Well done, 100% there. But I'm not sure you really know how the practical side of the Conservative Party works. And we have to bear in mind the impact that all of this makes on international business, international markets. I think it's dawned on everybody in recent weeks that if interest rates go up, it's not just mortgages that go up. It's also a dramatic effect on all our pensions. And bear in mind, most paying members of the Conservative Party are older people. And the result of that can be quite devastating when you start to look at the figures of what's happened to your pension, for example, let alone the cost of living and the gas crisis that's been caused by Putin. There's a whole host of things there. So I have no doubt whatever that for the next year or so, perhaps leading into the general election of 2024, the economy and the way it is managed and the stability that we can bring are by far the most important aspects. And it's something that the Tory party are much better at. We're much better at economics than we are at politics, you know, much better. And that's what we need to go to the electorate with when we have to have a general election by the end of 2024.
Oh, Edwina, you're not mincing your words this morning, but what do you say to those who say that there's something anti-democratic about what is going on? I mean, whatever people's criticism of Liz Truss, is she won fair and square? And also, she was very clear about what kinds of policies she wanted to implement in the leadership race. And now, with all of this talk of replacing her, there's discussion about cutting out the members as a whole. So is there something quite anti-democratic about what is going on?
Well, I'm not sure how democratic it is when party is in government for the Prime Minister to be chosen by a selectorate. And indeed, the selectorate at 160, 180,000 is much smaller than it was. You know, when I was a kid, the membership of the Tory party was 2.5 million. And then you got closer to some kind of democracy, but they had no say whatever in choosing the leader. I think what Sir Graham Brady has to do now, the chairman of the 22 committee of backbench MPs, I think what they have to do now is devise some other system for having a prime minister while we are in office. Because what we do when we are actually in office and have a majority in the House of Commons is we're being entrusted with the government of the country. And so it's not just a question of our internal politics. That would be entirely selfish. And in the end, we only succeed as a government, we only succeed as a party if we have the interests of the country at the very heart of everything that we do.
It's interesting that this system was actually invented, this membership election system, first used in 2001, back when the Tories had fewer than 200 seats in the House of Commons, a seismic defeat, of course, following 97. Tomorrow night is the 100th anniversary of the meeting that formed the 1922 committee. I understand that there's a dinner in the Carlton Club of members of the 22 who will be celebrating that anniversary of sort of backbencher power. Edwina Curry, what would you say to those leading that committee who are going to meet over, I'm sure, some alcohol and food tomorrow night? What should they be looking for in terms of a new system?
I would say to them, you know, calm down, dears, in the words of quite a successful member, Prime Minister of recent times. I would also say, for heaven's sake, don't drink too much, you are in public. And I would say, please don't touch the thigh of the young person next to you, and then you won't get into any trouble.
Gosh, well, sound advice.
Indeed.
Perhaps not that useful constitutionally, but certainly reputationally. Edwina Curry, thank you so much for joining us this morning on To The Point. Really appreciate your time.
Indeed. Well,
what a hoot.
Indeed. Well, coming up, as the pressure on the Conservatives continue to mount, the new Chancellor Jeremy Hunt claims his new changes will save the government £32 billion, but isn't he merely reversing the decisions announced by his predecessor just weeks earlier? Can the public trust more economic U-turns? That's all that coming up just after the break.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. For most, it's the driest and sunniest day of the week today. A fine day for the vast majority with fairly light winds. Now, the winds are going to pick up in the southwest as we go through the day. Low pressure is out to the southwest, and that's very slowly moving in. We'll bring much more in the way of showers over the next few days. But for the time being, we have this area of high pressure bringing many places a fine day. We've started off with a fair bit of fog around. That is steadily clearing away. There are one or two showers just coming in to the far northeast across the Northern Isles, parts of northern Aberdeenshire. Small chance of a light drizzly shower in the southwest where there's quite a bit of cloud and it is quite breezy. But elsewhere, light winds, sunny spells, temperatures above average, getting into the high teens across the southeast. Through this evening, we'll see that breeze picking up more, the cloud thickening and some outbreaks of rain pushing into western areas through the night. Mostly across southwest England before midnight, but some showers then developing over Wales and eventually into parts of Northern Ireland. These showers could turn quite heavy as we go towards dawn. Elsewhere, most places again dry and clear, one or two mist and fog patches, but generally not as misty, not as foggy and not as cold as last night. A cloudier day to come then on Wednesday, certainly for Wales and Northern Ireland, with some outbreaks of rain. Could be quite heavy in places too. We'll see some showers drifting up towards northwest England by the end of the day. And more showers coming into the southwest. Hit and miss though. Much of the day will be dry, and certainly over the Midlands, eastern England, most of Scotland. It is another dry day, just with more cloud compared to today. Still quite mild in the south, but it is turning windier. Some gusty winds developing through the course of Wednesday, particularly during the evening, and we'll see more heavy showers coming in. So quite a change across southwestern parts during Wednesday evening. Say some heavy outbreaks of rain for southwest England and parts of Wales. And the outlook is for more showers as we go through Thursday and particularly Friday. But through this week, staying fairly mild.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
It's 10:22. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin Eman and Tom Harwood. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Well, yesterday the new Chancellor Jeremy Hunt announced plans to try and stabilise the British economy, including scrapping the planned cut to income tax and 2-year support for household energy bills. That's now lasting just 6 months.
Yes, well, the Chancellor claims his new changes will save the government £32 billion, but tough times remain ahead.
So
this government will take the difficult decisions necessary to ensure there is trust and confidence in our national finances. That means decisions of eye-watering difficulty. But I give the House and the public this assurance: every single one of those decisions, whether reductions in spending or increases in tax, will be shaped through core, compassionate, conservative values that will prioritise the needs of the most vulnerable.
So how have the markets reacted to the Chancellor's U-turns? And what will the impact be of those changes? What will the impact be on everyone in the country? Well, here to explain all of this is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan.
Well, thank you for joining us on the programme this morning, Liam. So tell us, what is the impact going to be for ordinary people?
Well, the market response to Jeremy Hunt's complete evisceration of the Kwarteng Trust mini-budget has been broadly positive, but you kind of expect that because what they did is, rather than enacting a £45 billion package of tax cuts, they enacted, while keeping some of that package, they enacted also a £32 billion tax increase. That's about a 5% increase in the total amount of tax revenue expected to be collected from the economy next year. But I have to say, given the kind of major surgery they did in the political high drama, the market reaction hasn't been particularly dramatic. You've seen sterling strengthen slightly. You've seen borrowing costs come down quite a bit yesterday, from about 4.1, 4.2 to about 3.9. And these are the borrowing costs that the government faces when it borrows money for 10 years from pension funds, insurance companies and other investors. And they do set the benchmark for mortgages and pensions. So if we have a sort of 10-year gilt yield, as we call it, of 3.9%, a mortgage rate's going to be like, 5.5%, 6.5% once the bank or building society has added its costs and its profit margin. If government borrowing costs spike up to 5%, then the mortgage rate's likely to be more like 7 or 8%. So that is good news if you need to try and fix your mortgage and so on, or if you've got a personal loan that's on a variable rate. I have to say, though, I think a lot of the reason why borrowing costs are coming down, they've actually started to spike up a bit over the last hour, is because the Bank of England has decided, in a way it didn't decide independently when Truss and Kwarteng would have liked this to happen. They've decided with Hunt now in place that they aren't going to enact, for now, something called quantitative tightening. That's basically taking the bonds, or some of the bonds that the Bank of England's bought off the government, and selling them back to the market. If the Bank of England's doing that while the government itself is trying to raise money from the market, it means borrowing costs go up. Now the Bank of England's decided to pause that, what we call quantitative tightening, the inverse of quantitative easing, then those borrowing costs have come down slightly. But I'm concerned, actually, in the last hour, borrowing costs have started to go up again, despite that move by the Bank of England.
But perhaps there might be something in this idea that the growth plan had elements that were actually quite good. And whilst overall the growth plan was clearly something that spooked markets, that thought that perhaps the overall, when put together, it perhaps looked unaffordable. But there were growth-boosting elements that the International Monetary Fund said would boost growth in this country. Might we now be, because the corporation tax rise is going ahead, you said that there might be some other tax rises in there as well, might we now be more likely to go into recession because it's been junked?
Let's be clear, Tom, when the mini-budget came out, the Institute of Directors, the Confederation of British Industry, the British Chamber of Commerce, everyone said, "Way, this is great. We're finally moving away from the highest tax take in 70 years, the highest economy share of tax as a share of GDP in 70 years, since the Attlee government, or Britain's New Jerusalem after the Second World War. We're finally moving away from that, and the business community was saying, this is great, this is going to get growth moving. We're not going to raise corporation tax paid by many small firms, of course, not just the big business high rollers who tend to find ways of avoiding it because they invest lots.
And base themselves offshore and the rest of it.
You can't do that if you're a sort of plumbing business in the Midlands and you still pay big corporation tax. We're not going to raise corporation tax to 25%. We're going to keep it at 19%. We're going to have more supply-side policies, like getting rid of regulation that silts the economy up. That's quite a difficult thing to do because businesses quite often like that regulation because it keeps their smaller rivals at bay. Almost none of that's now going to happen, not only because the tax cuts have been stymied or the tax freezes have been unfrozen in the case of corporation tax, but also because the Conservative Party hasn't got the political will to do it. And you've got very moderate, sensible MPs for political reasons, positioning reasons, saying that the Truss Kwarteng budget was like, libertarian jihadism and really extreme language.
When actually all it did was bring the tax burden down about 4 years ago.
Yeah, even less. It brought it back from the 70-year high to back where it was in 2019, 2020, and lowered the top rate of tax to where it was under Blair and Brown. They are not libertarian prime ministers. No. But, as you know, Tom, timing in politics is everything. Presentation is everything. The package was too big. There was too much at once. It was done with a bit too much zest and relish. Oh, yeah, and let's scrap the bankers' bonus cap as well, just because we're now in power. It riled a lot of ordinary, moderate people who would otherwise have been in favour of a bit more supply side.
And yet, looking at the numbers, about a quarter of it
no
was
one looks
tax
at the numbers,
cuts.
though, do they? It's all about the impressions. I mean,
But
come on,
three-quarters of it was extra spending on this energy price guarantee.
No one looks at the numbers. You know, people like me, oh, who cares what he thinks? You know, it's all about politics. It's all about the adjectives. You know, analysis is an adjective rather than an actual number. But I know you do look at the numbers, and on GB News, crikey, we try to look at the numbers, and the numbers show that this was not a particularly radical or extreme package at all. But the political scores on the doors show that she didn't prepare the ground. It was done too quickly. Even Margaret Thatcher, she had her debates between the wets and the dries, and you know, she tried to take some of the country with her. She tried to expose the policies of her political opponents with her
Didn't
own
do the
party.
radical stuff until the second term.
The radical stuff was gradually rolled out, and Liz Truss was just in, you know, it's a personal tragedy for her, but this is a big grown-up politics, it's a contact sport, and she tries to do too much too quickly. But the Bank of England didn't help by carrying on with its quantitative tightening, which now the political mood has shifted. It's decided, hey, presto, we're not going to do that anymore. The pound goes up, borrowing costs go down, everyone thinks Jeremy Hunt's a genius.
And Treasury orthodoxy now reigns supreme, potentially runs the country. Well, Liam, thank you so much for talking through that and making it so understandable for the audience as well.
Well, thank you. And we will be going to your views very shortly, but after the break, we'll be asking how significant a threat does China pose to British national security? On Sunday, a protester outside the Chinese consulate in Manchester appeared to be dragged into the grounds of the consulate by officials and beaten up. But before we look at that, we will have the headlines with Rosie.
A very good morning, 10:31. I'll keep you up to date today on GB News. Liz Truss is meeting her cabinet this morning after apologising for the mistakes she made in her first few weeks as Prime Minister. She'll hope that the admission that she went too far, too fast will pacify the party. The Prime Minister says she's still committed to growing the economy and has vowed to lead the Tories into the next general election. Well, it comes after the Chancellor reversed the majority of the mini-budget that had been published by his predecessor. The Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, told GB News that the Conservatives should now get on with delivering for the country. British households are being warned to prepare for blackouts in the new year. National Grid's chief executive says they could occur on really, really cold weekdays between 4 and 7 p.m. in January and February. It's John Pettigrew who issued the warning of potential rolling blackouts during the Financial Times' Energy Transition Summit. He was outlining possible scenarios if generators fail to secure enough gas from continental Europe to meet demand. 26 climate protesters have been arrested after blocking a main road into West London, disrupting traffic during rush hour. The Just Stop Oil activists sat on the A4 near Barons Court tube station, blocking both carriageways. Police eventually removed the campaigners after some had glued themselves to the tarmac. Daniel Craig is going to receive the same honour that's held by his character, James Bond. The 007 actor will be made a Companion of the Order of St Michael and St George for his services to film and theatre. He starred in the last 5 Bond films, including Casino Royale, playing Ian Fleming's iconic title role. The Princess Royal will award the honour at a ceremony at Windsor Castle later this morning. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.320 and 1.1491 euros. The price of gold is £1,460 and 60 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 6,963 points.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, it's 10:35. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Eman and Tom Harwood. We're live on your TV, radio and online. And before we get into the next subject, we're just going to go to some of your views on some of the subjects we've been talking about today. Liz Truss and whether or not she will survive, and also the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, and some of his policies. Well, Russell has emailed in and says, I think Hunt has gone too far, too fast, reversing the aims of the previous mini-budget. Sack him, Liz.
That's an interesting view. I'm not sure the gilt markets quite agree, but then again, should the gilt markets really be running the country? Ken has emailed in saying, why are we still getting warnings of blackouts after the government and so-called experts have said it is highly unlikely? Well, I'm afraid probably one of the reasons we're getting warnings of blackouts is we've fixed the price of energy, so people aren't going to conserve so much energy, and there's less energy than there was last year. So that's just a supply and demand issue, isn't it?
A bit of scaremongering so people change their energy usage behaviour, because realistically speaking, in what the sixth largest economy in the world, do we really have the prospect of blackouts?
Well, I mean, there's always a prospect, isn't there? If the wind doesn't blow, if the sun doesn't shine. One of the big worries about this winter is it's not only going to be quite cold, but it's not going to be very windy. And it's almost like we've gone back in time 100 years and we're back once again at the mercy of the elements.
Well,
very,
Russell,
very worrying.
Interestingly, is speculating on whether Jeremy Hunt will be the Prime Minister. He says there's no doubt the next step will be to make him Deputy PM, to give them a reason to make him Prime Minister. Then Liz will make an excuse to resign.
Well, that's what Edwina Curry was saying a little bit earlier in the programme.
Yeah, well,
fascinating one to watch.
Well, I worry whether or not that is democratic and if the public are being locked out of this very important process of the direction of the country. But we'll be bringing more view on that subject coming up.
Yeah, keep your views coming in. Of course, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Now, a warning that we're about to show you some disturbing footage. On Sunday, a protester outside the Chinese consulate in Manchester appeared to be dragged into the grounds of a consulate by officials and beaten up.
Yes, the Foreign Commonwealth Office has said that it is seeking clarity from the government, and Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy has called on the government to, quote, urgently summon the Chinese ambassador to demand an explanation for this incident, and that the quashing of peaceful protest will never be tolerated on our streets.
Well, joining us now to talk about this in more detail is Chang-Ching Kwong, campaigns coordinator for the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. Thanks so much for joining us on the programme. I mean, is this another example to reiterate essentially that China has values essentially that are divergent to that of Britain?
I don't think that it's true that China has any values other than having power in hand, to be honest. I think this incident clearly shows that China does not respect international law because a consulate operation should enjoy immunity, but the immunity shouldn't cover anything outside of the operation of the embassy. Beating someone up is clearly not, and damaging a peaceful protest materials is definitely not the case as well. So it's clearly that China would not respect rule of law or any kind of the values that Britain values in that case.
What is China trying to gain here? Would this have been something that is sanctioned from the Chinese Foreign Service, from Beijing? Or would this be someone just acting out sort of their own accord? Because clearly this is going to deeply damage what little reputation China has left in this country.
I'm not very sure about the political agenda behind that, but according to my experience, the Chinese authorities in Beijing have been very clear that diplomatic personnel have to be quite aggressive when it comes to handling issues regarding Hong Kong, Xinjiang and such. So they might be under the impression that they can do that because it's exactly what Beijing wants them to do and they only answer to Beijing but not other forces. And in a way, I don't think China cares so much about its international reputation. As you said, it's almost none left in that case. So I don't think they care about it so much. It's more about they making a stance that, this is not acceptable, talking about democracy in Hong Kong is not acceptable, not even in peaceful protests.
I mean, we spoke last week about China being designated a threat to the UK. I mean, do you think that the government of the UK are taking the threat of China seriously enough? There has been discussions over the last few years about Chinese money, Chinese state money in the universities and the impact that that was having on free speech and so on. We also discussed Chinese involvement in our strategic infrastructure, Huawei. And now with incidents like this, it doesn't seem to be getting any better.
I think it's just a week since the government has announced China as a threat, but surely the government hasn't been doing enough in the past few years. Like, for example, still no Hong Kong officials have been sanctioned, even though China has clearly torn up the Sino-British Joint Declaration, implemented the national security law in Hong Kong, like completely violating international law and human rights obligations. And there are evidence showing that officials are involved in human rights violations, but the UK still hasn't followed its allies, for example, the US way to sanction individuals from Hong Kong. So clearly the government hasn't been doing enough. And when it comes to business influence, economic influence, and academic influence, the government hasn't been taking it seriously. It's still seeing China as a foreign policy thing, but actually it's so intertwined with our domestic policies as well.
And just this morning, we learned the incredibly concerning news that former British Air Force servicemen have been being paid hundreds of thousands of pounds to fly over to China to train Chinese armed forces in how to combat Western aeroplanes, in how to combat Western fighter jets. The Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, this morning has declared this will now become illegal for former members of the British Armed Services to go and train Chinese troops. But the fact that this was going on, does this, in your view, look like China is preparing for war?
Just, I think a few days ago, when in the opening of the People's National Congress in China, Xi Jinping made it very clear that they will not give up the option of using force to annex Taiwan. So I can't say how likely is a war going to happen. I don't know for sure. But we can see that China is threatening and increasingly using different ways, as you said, having former military person to train their own armed forces. I'd say they are definitely preparing for it. And taking the lesson from Russia, we should not underestimate what they will do in a way. So I'd say the world is not prepared for any of that because people are still saying that, it won't happen, or trying to ignore the fact that it might happen and are unwilling to take actions to prevent it from happening.
And finally, I mean, what can we do then? Because you just briefly touched upon Russia, and it's not in the interest, of any Western country to have large hostile countries anywhere in the world, not least ones with nuclear weapons and so on. Is there anything that we can do to kind of bring China into the fold in a positive way, or to kind of support or facilitate liberalizing, democratizing processes, if that's even possible?
I think it's highly possible. There are a lot of things that we can do. For example, trying to set up legislation that will hinder human rights violations byproducts, for example, cottons being produced in Xinjiang, to go into our market. And that will create a new demand for humane products. And this will slowly but surely change the dynamic of the world. And China's bargaining power against the world surely is economic force. And so if we can try to make sure that everybody uphold higher standards, then things might change.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Very fascinating insights and really important conversation. Chung Ching-Kwong, Campaign Coordinator for the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. Thank you.
Yes, well, let's move on now to some domestic activities that are perhaps just as concerning. Activists from the campaign group Just Stop Oil are planning to protest outside Downing Street every day throughout October to, quote, demand an end to new oil and gas. The group is also advertising for people to sign up to, quote, take direct action, which will risk your arrest. Activists say they have already closed the Queen Elizabeth II bridge, the Dartford crossing, causing disruption to traffic. And they are halting traffic in other parts of London too.
Well, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is in West London for us. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme, Mark. What is the disruption like where you are?
Well, the disruption here has been cleared now, but it's clear, in a very active phase of these protests where we are getting Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion protests sporadically happening, really spontaneously happening, I should say, at least once, twice a day around the capital. As you mentioned in your introduction there, the Queen Elizabeth II bridge over the Dartford crossing, that is still blocked off to traffic as the two Extinction Rebellion protesters who went up onto that bridge yesterday are still up there and have not yet been talked down. Here this morning on the A4, though, it was blocked for a couple of hours, as we're told by Just Stop Oil that 30 of their activists blocked the main A4 road, that arterial route into the heart of central London, blocking both carriageways. Of course, the police had to get here in numbers before they could move in and start removing the protesters. Some had glued themselves to the roadway. Others, of course, in addition to that, had locked on to each other. So all of that takes some time. But within 2 hours, they were removed. 26 arrests, according to the Metropolitan Police. Those 26 people have been taken off for processing. But what happens, I'm afraid, is the merry-go-round of arrest, process, release, and they're back out and they're continuing with these disruptive tactics. 350 arrests we've had since the beginning of this month, so a very active period that we're in, and we can expect, sadly, for the very weary motorists and pedestrians in the central London area, many more of these protests in the days and weeks ahead.
Now, Mark, we're looking at some pictures here. These are people with skulls on their T-shirts. These are people who are deeply radicalised. These are people who genuinely believe that the world is going to have some sort of imminent extinction event. Looking at other sorts of radicalisation around particularly the United Kingdom, whether it's far-right or Islamist or Irish nationalist, might there be a step change here, if this is not dealt with properly, where people who genuinely believe that there will be billions of people killed will start getting rather more violent in their, perhaps, imagined crusade to stop what they believe to be Armageddon?
Well, certainly there's always a concern that the more anxious and desperate people who want to put over a certain message and a viewpoint, then they could resort to tactics that could, at the end of the day, have consequences that are far more serious. They're already serious if you're held up for hours at a time when you want to go about and do your business. It's disruptive at a time when we're facing economic difficulties in this country anyway. That's why the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has now decided to try again to get through tougher laws to try to clamp down on these disruptive protests. You remember, Tom, that under Priti Patel there was an attempt to introduce tougher sanctions against those who take part in protests that cause disruption and target critical national infrastructure. That was actually voted down in the Lords. Well, they're trying again, and today these amendments will be introduced in Parliament with a view this time, they hope, to getting through these new stricter laws that may result in some cases in jail terms, and the government believes that that might be the only way of trying to dissuade people from carrying out this kind of direct action is to actually threaten them with the potential of a jail term if they carry out such disruptive protests.
Thank you so much, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. Well, just how damaging is all this disruption for drivers who are already feeling the pinch? Joining us now is Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel UK. Thank you for joining us on the programme. I mean, just addressing some of the things that the protesters are raising, just stop oil. I mean, isn't that almost impossible right now? You know, it wouldn't be possible for us to just stop oil, or we would literally be having blackouts, as we were discussing just a moment ago.
Yeah, but you're assuming these people have got brains and you can actually talk to them and debate with them. I mean, they're amoebas. They've got one cell for a brain. I mean, I'm sorry, but I feel very strongly about it, as do my supporters. We've got 1.7 million supporters. All of them are drivers and truckers. I'm backed by the Road Haulage Association. The economy is being ruined by these people. It's not any logical argument whatsoever. Let's sit down and debate. And I publicly ask you, let's sit down and debate about what you want and what we want. And maybe there is a conclusion that we can come to. But you don't ruin people's lives, especially stopping people getting to hospitals and getting to college and getting to work. And that's the frustration is palpable. I've got about 1,000 emails in the last 2 days about it.
I've reported on these protests before. Protests, or I think that we could probably use stronger language for them. I've seen an ambulance being blocked from getting across Lambeth Bridge to St Thomas's Hospital. There was a video doing the rounds on social media just last week showing a fire engine being stopped in central London. This is material.
Absolutely right, but the problem is there's a lot of things going wrong with this economy. I won't talk about that at the moment, but fundamentally there is an anti-car policy, for example, and what we're seeing, low traffic networks, congestion charges, ultra-low emission zones, we're the highest tax drivers in the world. Everything is going against drivers, and they're the commercial heartbeat of the economy. We need transport running smoothly, and these people are doing this, and you made the comment, Tom, earlier just now, they're anarchists, that's all they are.
I mean, what do you make of the kind of anti-democratic tactics, essentially, that, as you rightfully mentioned, they're not necessarily trying to win their argument out in the public square. They're essentially disrupting the lives of ordinary people that are just trying to do their job, go to work, raise a family and so on. And these are the kind of tactics they're using.
Well, only a couple of days ago, I was in Parliament Square and I was off to see a minister to talk about a particular major report we issued. And I saw all of these people glued outside and the police were sitting down talking to them and chatting with them. You can't debate with these people. You have to remove them. But whoever's ever behind this, and they are quite well financed, and most of them are quite privileged, most of them are white, middle class, all that sort of thing. And I've asked a question to many of them sitting there, quite polite. I said, what are you campaigning against? We've got to get rid of oil, the planet's coming to an end. No, hang on, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the science. They don't know the science.
It's interesting, they disagree with the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change from the UN, that says net zero by 2050. These people are talking about net zero by 2030. They're talking about it by 2025. They're going against scientific consensus in what they're demanding, but most perniciously, perhaps, they believe they can get what they want through violence and intimidation. And that's something that isn't that far away from groups that try and intimidate the public through other means. And we have seen these people use more violent means, smashing windows of businesses, throwing paint and soup at buildings and artwork. Are we seeing some kind of dangerous ratchet here?
Absolutely, and I've had death threats. No, I run a campaign simply for cheaper cost of motoring. You've known, Tom, I've been doing this for years. And I've had dog faeces wrapped up in cycle gloves rammed through my letterboxes and things like that. Wow. That's not debating, is it? That's not discussion. I actually use objective and I bring... I mean, I've got 37 million drivers in this country that I think agree with most of what I say. I could bring this whole country to a halt. I could bring all trucks at every single entrance and exit to every motorway. I could do that. We don't do that. We debate. We produce objective evidence, economic evidence, what it means to us, what it means to the economy, what it means to our lives.
Well, thank you, Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel. I mean, it is astonishing when we saw that footage of the criminal damage that they did just reported the Van Gogh painting. I mean, it really reveals to me their attitude towards, humanity, that, these great works that form the basis of our civilization should just be destroyed and dismissed and in such a grotesque way.
And the throwing of milk on the floors of supermarkets, the pouring of faeces over the statue of Captain Tom, all of these things, it seems like one after another, there is just a disregard for property rights. They call themselves non-violent protesters. I think there's nothing they do that is non-violent. That is clearly the definition of violence. And if we look at what the definition of trying to change policy or affect the way that a country is run through violence and intimidation, that comes awfully close to terrorism.
Indeed. Oh, well, it's not just about me and Tom's opinions, it's also about yours. So as we are the People channel, we love to hear what you have to say. We've had loads of your views this morning on the topics that matter to you, so keep them all coming, gbviews@gbnews.uk. And we're happy to say we're joined by our viewer right now. So our GB viewer, James Robinson, is with us this morning to talk about some of the issues very quickly that we've been discussing. Firstly, thank you so much for joining us, James. What do you make of the Conservative U-turns that we've seen over the last week?
They're not unexpected, are they, really? I mean, the mini-budget was obviously a mess from the moment it started. So we've obviously got the wrong person in power. They voted the wrong person in. Sunak is highly intelligent, he's numerate, and, of course, he understands what he's doing. But I don't feel necessarily that that's the case with Truss or anybody else at the moment. And to put somebody like Jeremy Hunt in as Chancellor, who failed miserably in terms of the leadership election, and suddenly put him in as Chancellor, probably one of the most unpopular, significant people in the Tory party, put him in as Chancellor is beyond belief. She's only got days, really. I mean, it's just how many nails the Tories want to put in their coffin, I would say.
But is Rishi Sunak that numerate? Will raising corporation tax on British businesses as we face a recession really be what's needed for this country, or might it make that recession deeper and worse and more damaging for us?
Well, I would tend to look at business rates more for the small and medium-sized businesses rather than worry about corporation tax. They employ 42% of everybody in this country, and they work damn hard, the people that work for themselves. And consequently, we have basically a system where whatever the valuation officer says is the value of the property, it becomes 50% of that becomes your business rates. That doesn't change. I've been to tribunals, and believe me, it's very hard to work against the valuation officer because the tribunal is very heavily weighted on their side because they're basically a Majesty's Rev. That's what they are.
Well, James, it sounds like you're backing tax cuts in this area. Really, isn't that sort of what Liz Truss was trying to do, perhaps too quickly, and combined with extra spending as well?
Sorry.
But
yeah, I don't agree with you. We've had 12 small businesses, and I know where the on costs are in them, and where you can afford to employ more people or give them more hours, more higher salaries or whatever. And they can be quite debilitating, business rates to small businesses, and consequently, if you want to look at bringing people that are on lower wages, say, around the poverty level of £16,000 to £17,000 a year,
James,
into it, you've got to allow them to earn.
Yeah, apologies. We're going to have to cut you short. Hopefully we can bring you back again soon because your perspective is really important and fascinating. Thank you so much, James Robinson, one of our GB viewers, talking about the U-turns, the Conservative Party, and whether or not Liz Truss is the right candidate.
So we'll be getting to it all more after this.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Florin Iman and Tom Harwood on your TV, radio and online. We are with you until midday with a show jam-packed with all of today's big stories, lots of discussions, expert guests and our opinions as well as yours.
So make sure you get in touch with your views. As usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address to write into. We'll be getting to those throughout the show, but before that, the latest headlines.
A very good morning. Just 1 minute past 11. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Russia's launched new airstrikes targeting the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. 2 people were reportedly killed when missiles hit an energy facility. Ukraine's presidential office say there have also been 2 missile strikes in the southern eastern city of Dnipro, causing a fire and serious damage. It's not yet known whether the power station in Kyiv has been hit directly and if there are any casualties. In the north of the country, an airstrike left a city without water and electricity supplies. The actor Kevin Spacey will be cross-examined in a New York court later today after denying sexual abuse claims. Yesterday, the Oscar winner broke down while in the witness box, saying he regretted apologising to fellow actor Anthony Rapp for something he says he didn't do. Rapp is suing the star in a civil case, alleging unwanted sexual advances were made in 1986 when he was 14 years old. Logos on school uniforms could be scrapped to make them more affordable as part of a review being launched in Wales. Options being considered including no logo at all or iron-on badges that are available free of charge. Well, this could give families the option to purchase uniform at cheaper costs from a greater variety of retailers. The consultation will run until the end of November. Daniel Craig is going to receive the same honour that's held by his character James Bond. The 007 actor will be made Companion of the Order of St Michael and St George for his services to film and theatre. He starred in the last 5 Bond films, including Casino Royale, playing Ian Fleming's iconic title role. The Princess Royal will award the honour at a ceremony at Windsor Castle later this morning. We've got a more extensive political roundup for you at past, but right now it's 3 minutes past 11. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens.
Well, good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Flaren Eman, and Tom Harwood on your TV, radio and online. We've got a great show lined up for you to kickstart your final hour, so here's what's coming up.
Yes, Labour is 36 points ahead of the Tories in the polls, the highest lead ever recorded by one pollster for any party. This comes after Liz Truss is facing calls to resign only 6 weeks after entering number 10, following the economic disruption of the government's mini-budget. So will Labour be our next government?
And as the cost of living crisis continues to bite, pubs around the country are being forced to hibernate for the winter in a bid to avoid spiralling energy, food and staff bills amid the cost of living crisis. We'll be looking at that just later on in the show.
And today marks World Menopause Day, which aims to raise awareness on improving the health of women in their midlife. What more can we do? And what more do we need to know? We will be speaking to a women's health doctor later on in the programme.
Yes, we have all that coming up and much more across the programme, so make sure you get in touch with your views as usual. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Well, the Prime Minister is facing calls to resign from within her own party just 6 weeks after entering number 10. This follows, of course, the ups and downs in the economy following the mini-budget. Liz Truss has reiterated that she is still committed to boosting economic growth, although has accepted that her initial plan was not the way to do it.
Well, early on in breakfast, Isabel and Paul spoke to Armed Forces Minister James Harpy amid reports that backbenchers are planning a rebellion against Liz Truss. Let's take a look.
The reality is that, yes, a mistake was made. She went too far, too fast with the mini-budget as it was. But there are also a set of global economic conditions that require stability in government. There's also a security situation in Europe right now that requires stability in government. And what we must do as Conservative politicians is row in behind the Prime Minister and get on with delivering for the country now that she has owned up to and apologised for the mistake that was made with the budget. I don't think that she has abandoned an intent to cut taxes in the way that she envisaged over the summer for good. I think that she has recognised that to try to do all of it in one fiscal event very soon after the start of her premiership, in the context of a very skittish market with the pension funds very highly leveraged against the value of gilts and the borrowing package causing a collapse in confidence in gilts and thus a fall in price that was going to precipitate all sorts of badness in the city. I think that reacting to those economic realities is the leadership that she needed to show. The capping of energy prices for this winter still stands, and that should not be sniffed at. We've gone from a place where the projected average energy bill for the average household was going to be £6,000, and as a consequence of the government's intervention, it's reduced this winter to £2,500. So there is still a very meaningful set of cost of living measures that have been introduced by the government for this winter that still stand. But what I can absolutely guarantee you is that the Conservative Party, as a party, whoever is in charge, will not succeed at the next general election if we spend the next year tearing ourselves to shreds and disagreeing over who should be the leader. We have a leader chosen by our members. We need to get behind her. And if we do, then there is every chance that we can win the next general election, because what nobody is talking about at the moment is that the party that has started to call itself the government in waiting actually has no answers to the current economic circumstance either. They are kidding us that they will neither raise taxes nor cut spending. And that is a completely unsustainable position.
Well, James Heapy there, the Armed Forces Minister, saying that the Labour Party themselves now need a bit more scrutiny if they're to call themselves a government in waiting. Of course, latest polls show that the Conservatives would face a near wipeout in a general election as Liz Truss's government continues to U-turn, some might even say implode. Now, Labour is, according to one poll, 36 points ahead of the Tories. The average is slightly lower, of course, but that particular poll is the highest recorded by any pollster for any party in the history of British governance. So, will the Labour Party be our next government? Well, let's speak to the journalist and political consultant Emma Burnell. What's your take on all of this?
As someone who is on the left, as a Labour member,
I have the absolute horror of saying out loud that we might get a Labour government. All too often we thought that was going to happen on the left and it didn't. It is very, very hard at the moment not to say out loud that Keir Starmer is going to be the Prime Minister after the next maybe. Who knows how long whoever replaces Liz Truss, whenever they replace Liz Truss, will last. The Tory party are ungovernable, and the country is desperate to be governed by people who know what they're doing, by grown-ups. And at the moment, there's only one option for that, and that's the Labour Party.
But is it right that, for example, Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, is so far ahead in the polls, not necessarily because he has a transformational alternative that answers all of the problems that people are raising right now, but because the Conservatives are in, frankly, disarray?
Politics is choices. There are two parties that will, at some point, lead this country. One of them is the Tory party. People have taken a look and they've gone, absolutely not. The other is the Labour Party, who've spent quite a long time coming from a very, very bad, very messed up position and really putting in the hard yards to try and turn that around in a way that is sensible and credible. Are they doing everything that I would wish they would do in a dream world? No, of course they're not, because politics doesn't exist in a dream world. And that's the big problem that Liz Truss had. She tried to actually implement her fantasy of politics, her fantasy of economics, and she wasn't dealing with the reality of the country that she's actually supposed to be leading. So I think it is right because people are making a choice, and the choice seems to be more obvious than it ever has been.
Yet, Bernal, if we're talking about the Labour Party as the next government, do we not need to explore what they would actually do with a bit more criticism and detail? I've been looking at the mini-budget and the measures within it. In fact, I think we can show a little graphic now of the areas of this mini-budget measures. Now, by my reckoning, by my calculation, looking at these 7 large fiscal measures within it, the Conservatives have now U-turned on so many of them. They've U-turned on the energy price freeze, the corporation tax rise reversal, the basic rate of income tax cut, and the IR35 reversal. The Labour Party now supports more measures within that mini-budget than the Conservative Party do. Is it right to say that the Labour Party is sensible and credible when actually they're supporting tens of billions of pounds in unfunded spending commitments and indeed tax cuts?
Sorry, that wobble was my cat jumping onto the table. I do apologise. He has very strong opinions on this. Yes, I think there are going to have to be adjustments made by the Labour Party in response to the crisis, because there's going to be less money than there was. But actually, the market didn't respond to tax cuts. They responded to unfunded tax cuts. The market aren't responding to spending promises, they're responding to unfunded spending promises. And what the Labour Party have done painstakingly is put how everything is going to be funded first at the heart of any policy promises they make. There is an understanding of how it will be funded, and that's why what they wouldn't do is cause the same kind of catastrophe, because they're not making promises that the market knows they just can't deliver.
But with respect, the Labour Party haven't said how they'll fund potentially upwards of £150 billion for an energy price freeze. They've talked about a windfall tax that, in their own calculations they sent round to lobby journalists, raises £3.4 billion extra. I mean, that's a gap of maybe, if you want to be incredibly critical, £146.6 billion. I mean, that's unfunded. Clearly there's unfunded commitments from the Labour Party here. Is the worry now that they've been getting away without this sort of scrutiny, as no one thought they would be in power, and now people think they will be in power? These are exactly the questions that will be asked of Sir Keir Starmer.
These are absolutely the questions that will be asked. My response to you is I have absolute confidence that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer can answer these questions far better than Liz Truss can, and at the moment, certainly than Jeremy Hunt can, definitely than Kwasi Kwarteng ever could. There are two types of politician And what we're seeing at the moment is people who are going very slowly and moderately, either in the centre left or the centre right, and people who want to go very, very hard. And we had a Labour Party that wanted to go very hard, and the public rejected that. We've had a Conservative Party that went very hard, and the public have rejected that. So what we're going to have are a vision from the Labour Party that is the complete opposite, not just in policy from this current Conservative Party, but in attitude, in the approach, going for being, as Rachel Reeves was once so politely described, boring snoring, because my God, couldn't we do with a bit more boring right now?
Well, thank you, Emma Burnell, political consultant and journalist. Thank you for that. I mean, I worry if the bar is so low that you only have to be slightly higher or slightly better than Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. But you have to hand it to Keir Starmer. I mean, in 2019, many people did think that the Labour Party were going to be out for a generation. And within a few years, they have a poll lead that is historic, to say the least. But there is still huge uncertainty and unpredictability.
Dare I say it, Sir Keir Starmer is following the Theresa May playbook. Of course, in the 2016 leadership contest, all the candidates sort of took each other out. Michael Gove took out Boris Johnson and everything else, all that mess. Theresa May stood still, did absolutely nothing and accidentally became Prime Minister. Might we be seeing the same?
She didn't end up particularly...
No, that's the thing. If you are a very, very boring person who accidentally becomes Prime Minister, then suddenly you could be found out far too late in the game. That's what happened to Theresa May as well. It may well be a risk for Sir Keir Starmer.
Indeed. Well, let's head to Downing Street and speak to our GB News political reporter, Catherine Forster. Thank you for joining us again on the programme. I don't know if you heard some of the conversation we were having just then, but is it now an inevitability that Keir Starmer will be the next Prime Minister?
Well, as we've learnt over the last few weeks, things change very quickly in politics. So although at the moment that would seem to be the case, and at the moment it would seem that the only question is how big the Labour majority will be, I think it is worth bearing in mind that only about a year ago, Boris Johnson seemed to be at the height of his powers. He was talking about 10 years in power. And of course, at the last general election, when he won that 80-seat majority, people thought Labour would be out of power for at least a decade. They thought Keir Starmer might be a caretaker leader rather than a Prime Minister. So things do change. Never say never that the Conservatives couldn't come back from this, but certainly a very bleak mood in the party at the moment. Cabinet has finished in the last few minutes. A number of ministers have come out, the vast majority of them pretending not to see the media and pretending not to be able to hear the media, who have shouted largely in vain, apart from, again, the ever cheery and polite Business Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg. Also, there was a little bit of a to-do with the Education Secretary, Michelle Donlan, who came out. A lot of the ministers either walk along behind me out towards the street or walk through here to get into the car. And there was a bit of an argument between her and some of the photographers and chill out. I'm not quite sure who told who to chill out, but there you go. But very grim faces, and I do imagine that despite Liz Truss's efforts to stop leaks, that leaks will indeed begin to appear in the next couple of hours about what was said in Cabinet, because of course, as we've learned, things have changed very radically and all departments now are looking to make cuts, which clearly is not going to go down well with many MPs or many cabinet ministers. So,
well, Catherine, that is a fascinating bit of colour there, because Michelle Donlan is not seen to be a particularly irritable person. She's one of the most emollient members of the cabinet, and that potentially speaks to a frame of mind, doesn't it, about how frosty that cabinet meeting might well have been.
Yes, you do wonder. She came out, and I did think it was brave of her. She wasn't wearing a coat. She strode quite confidently past, and then things all deteriorated somewhere around the corner, and it went on for a good couple of minutes. There was a real bit of argy-bargy and quite unpleasantness. So I think Obviously, many members of the government are feeling under a lot of pressure. Clearly, they have a Prime Minister who, as everybody is saying, is in office, but has really very little authority, very little credibility. They have a new Chancellor who has binned pretty much the whole of the previous Chancellor's mini budget and appears to be effectively Prime Minister. And what do? They have no agreement about how to get rid of Liz Truss. They have no agreement about who should take her place. All they can agree on is they're in a terrible mess and they do not want a general election.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the programme, Catherine Forster, our political reporter. And, you know, there is much more to worry about. I saw a poll on Twitter which found that actually the majority of voters would prefer a coalition of chaos with Labour and the SNP over another leadership by Liz Truss. So that is more worrying news for the Conservatives.
Well, I suppose if the anti-growth coalition has taken over government, you might as well have a different form of an anti-growth coalition. Well, all that and much more to come after the break as the cost of living continues to soar. Pubs being forced into winter hibernation to cut down costs for this winter, with businesses facing up to 300% higher bills than last year. Pubs are having to close their doors to customers. We'll be looking at that after this.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. For most, it's the driest and sunniest day of the week today. A fine day for the vast majority with fairly light winds. Now, the winds are going to pick up in the southwest as we go through the day. Low pressure is out to the southwest, and that's very slowly moving in. We'll bring much more in the way of showers over the next few days. But for the time being, we have this area of high pressure bringing many places a fine day. We've started off with a fair bit of fog around. That is steadily clearing away. There are one or two showers just coming into the far northeast across the Northern Isles, parts of northern Aberdeenshire, and a small chance of a light drizzly shower in the southwest where there's quite a bit of cloud and it is quite breezy. But elsewhere, light winds, sunny spells, temperatures above average, getting into the high teens across the southeast. Through this evening, we'll see that breeze picking up more, the cloud thickening and some outbreaks of rain pushing into western areas through the night. Mostly across southwest England before midnight, but some showers then developing over Wales and eventually into parts of Northern Ireland. These showers could turn quite heavy as we go towards dawn. Elsewhere, most places again dry and clear, one or two mist and fog patches, but generally not as misty, not as foggy and not as cold as last night. A cloudier day to come then on Wednesday, certainly for Wales and Northern Ireland, with some outbreaks of rain. Could be quite heavy in places too. We'll see some showers drifting up towards northwest England by the end of the day. More showers coming into the southwest. Hit and miss though. Much of the day will be dry and certainly over the Midlands, eastern England, most of Scotland. It is another dry day, just with more cloud compared to today. Still quite mild in the south, but it is turning windier. Some gusty winds developing through the course of Wednesday, particularly during the evening, and we'll see more heavy showers coming in. So quite a change across southwestern parts during Wednesday evening. Say some heavy outbreaks of rain for southwest England and parts of Wales. And the outlook is for more showers as we go through Thursday and particularly Friday. But through this week, staying fairly mild.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB
We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 11:24. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin Iman and Tom Harwood. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, as the cost of living crisis continues to bite, pubs around the country are being forced to, quote, hibernate for the winter in a bid to avoid spiralling energy, food and staff bills amid the cost of living crisis.
Well, some pubs have had to close their doors until spring or miss out on the festive period, which can make or break for many smaller pubs. Well, the energy bill relief scheme is currently only in place until March, leaving pubs concerned that costs will spike after and put firms at further risk. Well, joining us now is Greg Mulholland, former MP and director and chair of the British Pub Confederation. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, do you think, what do you make of some pubs basically saying that they're going to close during the winter when that potentially is a very lucrative and important time for them?
Well, I think that in itself shows just how serious the situation is for pubs. And I think it's important to realise why it's so serious. On the one hand, pubs themselves have hugely spiralling costs, particularly energy bills. And let's remember that the business energy package is nothing like the domestic package, which in itself has been shown not actually to be a cap on energy bills. So pubs are still, even with the cap in place, bills that are going to be, in some cases, 200-300% more than they were last year. So still, that's a huge problem. And at the same time, of course, the cost of living crisis means that people simply don't have the same money in their pocket. And one of the first things that people have to cut back on if they are struggling to make ends meet is going out, is doing things like going to the pub. So the fact that some pubs are having to take that decision, that knowing that they simply can't make a profit with the level of energy bills and the other costs, that they are closing their doors. That, however, is a decision that only some pubs can make, where the pub is owned by either the individual who can afford to do it or by a company who's prepared to mothball the pub. But it does stop the publican, be that a freeholder, a tenant, a manager, from making a living, and people are reliant on making a living. So that in itself then has an impact on the whole cost of living crisis and the numbers of people struggling to make ends meet. So it's a very worrying situation.
Yes, it's interesting that you make that distinction there, because it would be almost impossible to imagine how it would be more profitable to not open your doors and pay rent and pay heating and all the rest of it. So there's a distinction there between those pubs that are owned by the people that run them versus those that are rented properties. But even so, the idea that no customers, the idea that closing doors to customers could actually be a better financial position than opening doors to customers is so stark. What should be done about it?
Well, I think that's the key thing, and I think you may have been aware that there was real anger. The campaign for pubs, the national campaign representing pubs and publicans, expressed not only dismay but anger on the part of publicans that the now virtually totally U-turned mini budget of a few weeks ago had nothing whatsoever to deal with the issues that we're talking about. Now we've had a change of chancellor, then certainly we, and I'm sure other organisations, will be calling upon him, on Jeremy Hunt, to actually listen and to act. And that means acting to help pubs directly.
Just to interrupt you for a second there, the mini budget did, of course, have the freezing of corporation tax. Now that's going up, so that will hurt those larger pub chains. It had the energy price guarantee for businesses as well as for individuals. That remains until April. That will cap the unit cost of energy for those businesses. That will be a help, no doubt, at the cost of billions to the taxpayer. There were, of course, changes to alcohol duty in that mini budget, now scrapped, sadly, of course, as well. But there were things that were being done.
Well, I'll repeat what I said, Tom. There was nothing whatsoever in that mini budget to help ordinary pubs. Alcohol duty.
Why don't those three things help ordinary pubs? Why doesn't the change to alcohol duty? Why does the change? Well, excuse me, Greg Mulholland. I want to get a clear answer to this question.
I'm sorry. Do you want to have an interview? Because if you want to have an interview, I'll have one.
Greg Mulholland, I really do want to have an interview.
If you want to know, Shell, that you're a cheerleader for the reverse mini budget, then frankly, I'm wasting my time. If you want to listen to the reality,
I want to get an answer to a simple question. If you'll let me pose the question, I'll let you speak for your answer.
At the moment, you are being very rude and talking over me. Do you want to hear my answer or not?
Greg, I'd like to ask the question and then you can answer it. Can we agree to that?
Well, yes. So, frankly, shut up and let me answer it. You've already asked the question.
Greg, the question is, why does the energy price guarantee not help pubs?
It's showing that you're an ideological idiot, which, frankly, most people know.
Well, Greg, you're being rude, so we're going to end this here. Greg, thank you for your time. It is interesting, though. I wasn't making an ideological point. I was asking, how does an energy price guarantee, which fixes the unit cost of price for businesses like pubs, how does that not help? It was an extraordinary reaction to that question from Greg Mulholland there.
I do think there needs to be a broader conversation, though, interestingly, that so much of these questions are actually in the context of the consequences of the lockdown and actually what we did during the COVID-19 pandemic. And actually there seems to be almost a kind of amnesia across the board as to what exacerbated, if not the origins of many of these problems we're facing right now that many people were cheerleaders of. So there are obviously a lot of passionate views on many different sides of the debate. So.
Of course, and if there are any reasonable publicans watching who'd like to come and have a discussion about how there might be help through energy bills this winter, then please do get in touch. But for now, we're going to go to the latest headlines.
A very good morning. We'll bring you the news just after this short break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, 11:33. I'm Rosie Wright in the GB News newsroom. Let's get you up to date. Liz Truss met her cabinet this morning after apologising for the mistakes she made in her first few weeks as Prime Minister. She's hoping that the admission that she went too far, too fast, trying to grow the economy will pacify the party. It comes after the Chancellor reversed the majority of the mini-budget that was published by his predecessor. British households are being warned to prepare for potential blackouts in the new year. National Grid's chief executive says they could occur on really, really cold weekdays between 4 p.m. and 7 in January and February. John Pettigrew issued the warning of potential rolling blackouts during the Financial Times' Energy Transition Summit, outlining possible scenarios if generators fail to secure enough gas from continental Europe. 26 climate protesters have been arrested after blocking a main road into West London, disrupting traffic during rush hour. The Just Stop Oil activists sat on the A4 near Barons Court tube station, blocking both carriageways. Police eventually removed the campaigners after some had glued themselves to the tarmac. Daniel Craig is going to receive the same honour held by his character, James Bond. The 007 actor will be made a Companion of the Order of St Michael and St George for his services to film and theatre. He starred in the last 5 Bond films, including Casino Royale, playing Ian Fleming's iconic title role. The Princess Royal will award the honour at a ceremony at Windsor Castle later this morning. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1271 and €1.1459 euros. The price of gold is £1,466.33 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 6,979 points.
It's 11:36. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Iman and Tom Harwood. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Well, we are the People's Channel, of course, and we want to know what you, the people, make of the news and the state of politics in this country. Our Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, has been talking to some of you in the Midlands to get the view on the current state of government. Will, good to see you. What's the view in the Midlands?
Good morning. Yes, well, it's quite a turbulent time that we're seeing in politics. We're seeing reversals and U-turns towards those tax cuts that have been the headlines for the last month or two. And so coming to a place like Nuneaton, which is referred to as a bellwether indicator because since 1997, it's quite successfully indicated how the nation would be voting. So in 1997, it was a Labour vote towards Tony Blair. 2010, it was a Conservative vote towards David Cameron, and it's still a Conservative area under Marcus Jones. But when it indicates so well how the nation might be feeling, you've got to get in amongst the people and ask them how they're feeling, especially at a time quite like this. So earlier this morning, we spoke to some of the people in Nuneaton about their feelings watching these turbulent times in politics, Tom.
Well, I did vote Conservative the last election. However, I am teetering on changing to another party because I think they're a bit of a shambles at the minute.
She's made a right hash of her policy-making decisions with Kwasi, and for Mr Hunt to come in and totally undo the whole thing just goes to show that she's came in like a bull in a china shop and caused more harm than good.
Oh, come on, look at the mess that we're in at the moment. Everything's rising, prices are rising, gas, electric. Who knows where we're going to end up?
It's quite clear she's toast. It's just a matter of time now. And sadly, it's just knocked everyone. If you've got a mortgage, to hell.
I don't think she's doing a very good job.
I think she needs to be for more the people than, you know, and get them taking stuff off them.
I actually think she's all right. I think she might make some changes, considering what's been going on with Brexit, with the COVID.
If there was an election fairly soon, I would vote Labour, because I've always voted Conservative, but just on the history of what they're doing with society at the moment is disgusting, you know, so I wouldn't vote for them again.
Yes, well, whenever you're going up and down a street like this, you do get a variety of opinions. You have to cut some of them out. And some of the ones that I wasn't able to fit in, I kind of expected to hear a lot more people saying that they would usually vote for Labour, then change to Conservatives, and then back and forth. Actually, what I was hearing a lot of today, quite surprisingly, were a lot of Conservative voters that had voted throughout the whole of their lives for the Conservatives, considering Labour. So I suppose that's a really good indicator of certainly how people are feeling right now. There is a 13,000 seat majority here on Nuneaton, but it is classed as a marginal seat. So whether it's in 2 years' time when we see the next allotted election or something much sooner, I think places like Nuneaton here in the West Midlands will be a real key indicator for how the people across the nation might vote.
Really remarkable that seats with 13,000 majorities are now being considered to be those that may well turn after the scale of victory in 2019. Turbulent times indeed. Will Hollis, thank you so much for bringing us those views there from Nuneaton.
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully the Conservative campaign team are listening to those ordinary people, because many of them had some very strong views about what they're going to be voting for. Well, now, just before we go to the next subject, we're going to be looking at some of your views. Again, many people have been sending in their opinions on, for example, the Just Stop Oil protesters. Linda says, if I were in charge, I would find out where these protesters live and cut out their gas and electric supplies. Well, a strong opinion there. But
well, some might say that's what they're trying to do to everyone else.
Exactly. Some people would say that they get what they're given.
Ken has written in saying, class them as terrorists and jail them for a long time. Now, I don't know, it is a bit of a facetious point, but I mean, what is the difference between, realistically, what is the difference between trying to intimidate a country through terrorism to change its policy course versus trying to intimidate through violence in protest? I mean, it's not that
I would have
clear a line.
I'd have to disagree. I do think, you know, terrorists, or the people that we class as terrorists, generally do tend to enact much more violent acts.
Smashing windows is pretty violent.
Well, maybe against other human beings, it's probably more serious. But I worry about the impacts for, you know, freedom and the right to protest and so on. But that does not mean that we should not deal with these people strongly who are disrupting ordinary people.
I think the line comes when you damage property versus when you're just sort of making noise. I don't think that anything that is just sort of normal protest, waving a banner, walking down a street, being noisy, fine. Sort of smashing windows, destroying art. I mean, it's not that far away from, you know, tearing down a bridge.
Well, keep all of your views coming on this subject. Well, in another story, today marks World Menopause Day to improve health and well-being for women in their midlife. The theme for this year is cognition and mood. And the International Menopause Society has marked the event by publishing a paper that outlines midlife women commonly experiencing brain fog as they transition through menopause.
Well, the day aims to raise awareness on menopause and welcomes information surrounding this often not talked about part of life for women.
And now let's speak to gynaecologist Dr. Larissa Corder for more on this. So thank you for joining us on the programme. How significant is this day, Dr. Corder?
Well, it's really significant. I think it's amazing that we've got a whole day dedicated in the year to the menopause. You know, we should be talking about this as often as we can because it's such a huge, huge subject. You know, over 50% of the population is going to transition into the menopause and experience the menopause. And therefore, it's a phenomenally important time in a woman's life, but not just for her, also for all her relatives, family, friends, colleagues, all the people that surround her and provide her with the necessary support at this time. So it's brilliant that we're shattering some of these really important taboos that have been around for decades. There's been this deafening silence around this subject, and it's finally now being spoken more about on TV, in the media, and actually with a lot of employers as well who are making efforts and attempts to help as many women in the workplace as possible.
Yeah, on that point, that for a long time, a lot of people haven't really known much about menopause. I mean, it'd be really helpful if you could tell us a bit more about what kinds of things women go through during menopause. What is brain fog? What are the symptoms of it?
Exactly. So there's a whole range of different symptoms that goes with the perimenopause, which is the lead up into the menopause, and also as a woman enters the menopause. So that perimenopause period can last anywhere from a few months up to around 10 years. So it can be a really long period of time during which women can experience a whole range of things, what to do with their mood. So quite often women may report feeling quite depressed or low in mood, or severe changes to their moods. Often women will describe themselves as not quite feeling right, not feeling themselves. Along with this time and period, there's also quite a lot of turbulence in a woman's life as well, socially, potentially, and also with her career, so that can all contribute. Women can have problems with sleep and anxieties. They can experience problems with urination, so issues to do with burning and stinging, vaginal dryness. They can notice sometimes hair loss, and just not feeling themselves, not feeling quite right. So it's really, really important to be able to discuss it openly and to seek help where necessary. This issue of brain fog that's been highlighted and emphasised in particular with today's paper is really important because it's a symptom that does affect a lot of women. So it's to do with them finding that they may not be able to focus and concentrate and recall information as easily as before, and general changes with cognition. So it's really vital that we understand actually what the science is also showing, which is that there are real structural changes going on in the brain for a woman in the lead up into the menopause, as well as metabolism and neural connectivity as well. So there is real science to back up the fact that women do experience these really significant transitional changes, and of course it's very important to support women during this time.
And finally, Dr. Corder, I mean, why do you think that this is attention's being raised to this issue now? Because I've spoken to a few older women, and they're actually worried that this could even stigmatise, that their ability and their capability, if we kind of focus on all of the challenges and difficulties that might be associated with being an older woman, that could actually make people think they're less able and capable than men.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's important to remember that not all women, in fact, quite a large number of women, may not experience all of these symptoms or even some of these symptoms, and may have a very smooth transition into the menopause. And also, even if women do experience symptoms, there is a lot of help available out there. First of all, there's a lot of natural measures that can be done that a woman can help herself, can receive support over. And then for some women, it will involve taking HRT as well, and the advice of her doctor. But yeah, it's a really good point to remember that women, this is essentially a time of life when women should feel empowered. Even if they are experiencing debilitating symptoms, there is a lot that can be done. And for most women, they're reaching a sort of apex of their lives, really, in terms of all the freedoms that they can experience societally and in their careers. And they deserve to feel good about that. So I think, yes, it is really vital that we also understand this can be a hugely positive period of time in a woman's life, but the help is available for those who are suffering too.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Larissa Corder, obstetrician and gynaecologist. Thank you for discussing that really important subject.
Well, moving on, allegations surrounding the late Lord Mountbatten will be heard in a Belfast court this week. A former resident of a children's home in the city was waived his anonymity, claiming he experienced abuse by Mountbatten during the 1970s. Well, we're joined now by our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who can tell us more.
Well, Tom, this is a royal who Prince Charles, then Prince Charles, when he made the comments, described as the grandfather he never had. This is just how close a relationship was between the two of them. He had a strong influence on King Charles's upbringing. They went fishing together. They enjoyed outdoor activities together. And then, of course, Lord Mountbatten was killed by an IRA bomb in 1979, and now he's being accused of sexually assaulting or sexually abusing an 11-year-old boy in the 1970s. Now, this 11-year-old boy is now all grown up and he has waived his rights of anonymity to speak out. His name is Arthur Smith, and he is bringing civil action against a number of public institutions within Northern Ireland, alleging negligence and a breach of duty of care. Now, Arthur spent time at a care home called Kincora and another one called North Road Children's Home. And a 2017 public inquiry which looked into historical abuse, found that 39 boys were abused in Kincora over the years. 3 staff members were jailed jailed in the 1980s for that. But there was no evidence of an institutional cover-up by any means. But Arthur's case today focuses very much on his allegations against the late Lord Mountbatten. He's waived his rights of anonymity, born out of anger.
Is he the only complainant here? Because, of course, we have had in this country some flights of fancy from some people, not to suggest any of that here, one side or the other. But is this the only complainant in this case that we know of?
So the difference here today, Tom, is that this is the first time that allegations are being told in court. This is the first time allegations against Lord Mountbatten are being told in court. It's pretty uncomfortable, of course, for the royal family so soon after Her Majesty the Queen's death.
And obviously this accusation comes 43 years after Lord Mountbatten died. I mean, how do people feel about this?
Well, clearly it's a tragic time for the royal family so soon after the Queen's death, and Arthur's lawyer actually says he's very much aware that it's so soon after, but it isn't undertaken to deliberately offend sensitivities. In other words, they're not doing it now because the Queen has died. Their whole reason behind it, the lawyer says, Arthur says, is to expose perpetrators and institutions or other agencies. It's important to point out that Buckingham Palace never comments on active legal proceedings. This is very much a civil case against public institutions and alleged wrongdoing by them, and he's using his alleged abuse of Lord Mountbatten as an example.
And just in a different story, King Charles and Camilla won't be living in Buckingham Palace. Could you just tell us more?
Yeah, so it's been reported in the papers over the weekend they are currently still residing when they're in London at Clarence House. Buckingham Palace is in the middle of a 10-year refurbishment programme. It's not due to be completed until 2027. So the thought is from Palace courtiers that they'll move in 2027. At the moment, Buckingham Palace is still used for official engagements, official functions, but it's still a bit of a building site. I mean, I've been inside and there's bits of scaffolding everywhere still, apart from the big staterooms, which are used for official events. So perhaps in 5 years' time, we'll see them move in.
Well, thank you so much for bringing us that update. Cameron Walker, our royal reporter. Thank you.
Well, moving on, the rising cost of living is pushing people to find the next getaway destination as early as possible, amid that cost of living crisis, of course.
Well, this comes after new research shows 65% of travellers admit to financial mishaps that are costing them extra cash and racking up unnecessary expenses while abroad, the main culprit being banking fees whilst using a card abroad. So how can holidaymakers stick to a strict budget? So joining us now is travel editor of The Independent and friend of the channel, Simon Calder. Thank you so much for joining us, Simon. Just a quick personal experience, actually. I meant to be going to America later on in the year, but now with the exchange rate, the holiday is much more expensive than I originally anticipated. Is that not an example of how these costs of actually flying on holidays are getting much more?
Oh, certainly, yes. It's applying to every aspect of aviation. Of course, aircraft leases and aviation fuel priced in dollars. So if the dollar is particularly strong against the pound, that's bad news. And of course, you're not getting so much for your sterling. And of course, when you get there, you're going to be invited to tip about 20% these days. But there are plenty of things you can do. As you say, it's a lot to do with how you organise your holiday finances. And this interesting survey from HSBC UK finds that 20% of people, so 1 in 5, are actually changing the timing of their holiday to avoid the peak times. Obviously, that's a very good way to do it if you're able to do that, so you don't have a family who have to travel only in school holidays. Over 1 in 4 is making sure that they're actually trimming their holiday budget. But it's where you handle your holiday money that really counts. Now, I see all the time people spending money, wasting money abroad. Since the COVID pandemic, it's very much become a plastic society in terms of holidaying abroad. You're expected usually to pay with a credit or a debit card. Now, if you just use your ordinary credit or debit card from home, the chances are you're going to be paying high transaction fees, anything up to almost 3% on top of the cost of whatever it is you're paying for. And if you're getting money out of an ATM, you're going to find the charges rack up there as well. So there's a new product called Global Money from HSBC, and that effectively is saying you can spend like a local and you're not going to get all these shocks when you arrive. And there's one other aspect, dynamic currency conversion, which sounds really exciting. And that's where the waiter at the end of your very nice meal by the waterfront as the sun sets glides along with the bill and says, Senora, would you like to pay with in British pounds rather than in euros? And you say, oh, that's very handy. Thank you, I will. And you're losing 5 or maybe 10% on that transaction as well. Always spend like a local.
Well, thank you for that advice. I mean, thank you for joining us on the programme, Simon Calder. Very important and useful advice, hopefully, for holiday makers going forward. Travel editor at The Independent and friend of the channel, Simon Calder. We're just going to go to some of your views, just to end the show on some of the topics that we've been discussing. Still many people sending in their passionate viewpoints on the Just Stop Oil protests. I mean, William says this lot are not right in the head. It's no use giving them a fine and they'll pay for it with somebody else's money. If I did half of the things that these clowns did, I would be in jail blocking an ambulance on an emergency. The law needs to be changed. They should be put in jail.
It's a point that the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, put on Twitter, actually, that, for example, the two relatively middle-class women who threw soup at Van Gogh's painting last week, if that were two black boys from Lewisham, they'd be locked up in prison and the key thrown away. The difference, I think, in the way that many people approach this can be seen through the prism of class in many of these areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a fair point, but I do think a lot of it is politics. Certain issues seem to be much more trendy to the establishment and more favourable.
Could you imagine if Brexiteers started throwing paint on buildings because we didn't leave the European Union?
Yeah, because we saw a similar thing with the toppling of the Edward Colston statue. When it comes to some of these more fashionable ideas, and the law doesn't always seem to apply so equally, which isn't a good sign for democracy, in my view. Well, Martin also says, is there no confrontation from law enforcement to these protesters, the public themselves? Will they not confront them? Does modern British society really want this? I mean, similar strong views.
Yeah.
A lot of people disagree.
John saying that the police are pathetic in dealing with that matter as well. Really, really strong views there, particularly on Just Stop Oil, but also, got to say, many people writing in about the Prime Minister and the perilous position she's in. That's going to be coming up, of course, on the next programme here on GB News, GB News Day with Gloria De Piero and Mark Longhurst. So stick around for that as we explore all the twists and tales in this sorry story of government.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. For most, it's the driest and sunniest day of the week today. A fine day for the vast majority with fairly light winds. Now, the winds are going to pick up in the southwest as we go through the day. Low pressure is out to the southwest, and that's very slowly moving in. We'll bring much more in the way of showers over the next few days. But for the time being, we have this area of high pressure, bringing many places a fine day. We've started off with a fair bit of fog around. That is steadily clearing away. There are one or two showers just coming into the far northeast, across the Northern Isles, parts of northern Aberdeenshire. A small chance of a light drizzly shower in the southwest, where there's quite a bit of cloud, and it is quite breezy. But elsewhere, light winds, sunny spells, temperatures above average, getting into the high teens across the southeast.